We're back with breaking news in the January 6th investigation up on Capitol Hill. Phil Waldron has been subpoenaed by the Select Committee. He is that retired U.S. Army colonel connected to the 38-page PowerPoint that contained a blueprint for overturning the 2020 election, the one that was sent to Mark Meadows, that Mark Meadows later turned over to the January 6th committee. In a letter announcing the subpoena, committee chairman Benny Thompson writes this, quote, Mr. Waldron reportedly played a role in promoting claims of election fraud and circulating potential strategies for challenging the results of the 2020 election. He was also apparently in communication with officials in the Trump White House and in Congress, discussing his theories in the weeks leading up to the January 6th attack. The document he reportedly provided to administration officials and members of Congress is an alarming blueprint for overturning a nationwide election. Joining us now, Mike Schmidt, New York Times Washington correspondent, as well as an MSNBC national security contributor. Neil Katyal and Clint Watts are back with us. Neil, I mean, just along the lines of where this investigation seems to be focusing its efforts on the documents. We've talked about Adam Kinzinger describing the Eastman memo as a blueprint for a coup. Committee Chairman Benny Thompson now clearly singling out the creator of this document that was turned over by Mark Meadows and the 9,000 documents he did turn over as an alarming blueprint for overturning a nationwide election.
So I think, Nicole, the documents are really important, as you say, but I think it's a lot more than the documents. It's actually what this suggests to me is they are now circling around key individuals in power, both in Congress, the White House, and most specifically, Mark Meadows. I have a copy of a letter that was just sent to Phil Waldron, who's a kook, and I'm sure that he's facing some liability. But this is not about Waldron. It's about more than that. What they ask is they say, according to public reporting, you claim to have visited the White House on multiple occasions after the election, spoken to Mark Meadows maybe 8 to 10 times, and briefed several members of Congress on election fraud theories. And then, as you say, the letter gets into the PowerPoint and so on. But what Congress is doing here is they are really trying to get information, not about Waldron per se, but about Waldron's contacts with Trump, with Meadows, and with members of Congress. And any of those individuals could violate that criminal statute we were talking about earlier, obstruction of an official proceeding. And indeed, the language in this letter to Colonel Waldron today by Congress repeats some of the language from that statute. So this is now rapidly becoming a criminal investigation, and a criminal investigation that's looking not just at some of these low-level kooks, but people in positions of power.
And Mike Schmidt, I mean, low-level kook should be used, I guess, loosely. Someone who gets into the White House, quote, maybe 8 to 10 times, is a low-level kook punching way above their weight. I worked in the White House. Not very many people get in 8 to 10 times to brief a White House chief of staff, particularly in a period that should be dominated by a transition and a deadly pandemic. I want to read some of this letter because it's attributed to your colleagues in their reporting on December 10th. The 1-6 committee writes, you have also publicly acknowledged contributing to the creation of a PowerPoint presentation that was given to or described for Republican members of Congress on the eve of January 6th. That, in the footnotes, is attributed to Luke Broadwater's reporting on the January 6th committee examining the PowerPoint document sent to Meadows. And again, this bridge over the White House and the Republican members of Congress, who are also the focus of some great reporting from your other colleagues today. Tell me what this is shaping up for, in your view.
Well, to me, it demonstrates a problem that Trump has had dating back to the 2016 campaign. In, looking at Neil's description of Waldron, the problem is Trump allowed people like this to surround him at all different points in his presidency, including during the 2016 election. Most campaigns would not have had people like George Papadopoulos around working for them. And that theme continued throughout the presidency, where there were people in the administration who wouldn't have been in normal administrations. And what you see at the end, in those final 60 days after the election, is that even those who were the guardrails that were around were gone, and it allowed even more of these individuals like the My Pillow guy and Waldron and Eastman and Flynn to all come in and become sort of the cabinet, sort of the advisors directly to the president. And it's just the sort of on steroids version of what we saw starting all the way back in 2016.
Clint Watts, there's also a lot of billing being given to the root cause, perhaps, and the center, the beating heart of this committee's work, and that is promoting claims of election fraud and circulating potential strategies for challenging the results of the 2020 election. They're looking at outside groups that did that. They're looking at the rallies that featured those false claims of election fraud. And if Neil's reasoning holds, they are also looking at the ex-president's role in doing that.
That's right, Nicole. And Mike is exactly right. If you surround yourself with clowns, you're bound to get a circus. And this is an absolute circus of idiots when you look at it. Problem is they're armed and they're aggressive and they didn't stop. And I think that's where even a year later, we were talking about Fox News enabling this sort of lie to continue over the past year. You look a year forward now at the damage it's caused our democracy. And instead of them just marching in 8 to 10 times into the Capitol, you now have believers in this lie marching into polling places around the country, threatening election workers. You have them trying to take in roles of political power so that they can overturn an election if it doesn't suit their ends. So I think where the damage comes is no one remembers the hundreds of lawsuits and how they fell apart. People often don't put together all the pieces that this is a pretty small network of people behind the scenes that were challenging it in the courts. They were challenging it on Capitol Hill on January 6th. They're challenging local election officials and democracy around the country. And so where I think this spins out of control is if the lie continues to be told and they continue to double down on it, it puts us in a very dangerous place down the road. I think with Mr. Waldron, when he goes there, I'd be very interested to see, not just in terms of the committee, but other bigger charges, just in terms of criminal and civil liability that he would be under if he's advancing outright lies repeatedly, such that it's affecting the conduct of democracy.
Mike Schmidt, in the last block, I played for Neil's, I won't do it again, Liz Cheney on Tuesday night, invoking the language of the criminal code and asking this question: did Donald Trump, through action or inaction, corruptly seek to obstruct or impede Congress's official proceedings to count electoral votes? That is, I believe, the statute under which some of the insurrectionists have been charged. And I wonder if you think she is intentionally or just by virtue of the attention and the power of her words and her recitation of the text messages from Fox News to Meadows, from Donald Trump's son to Meadows, if she is applying pressure on this Justice Department to do just what she's asking. Answer this question: did Donald Trump, through action or inaction, corruptly seek to obstruct or impede Congress's official proceedings?
I don't know, but she seems to have a good sense of the type of things that's going to drive the news and that will drive Trump crazy. And she leans into that publicly as much as she can, and sort of had this moment this week where she effectively was able to raise the question of criminality while at the same time disclosing new details that really embarrassed the right and embarrassed Fox News and embarrassed well, I don't think Trump was embarrassed, but were embarrassing to Trump. And it's been interesting to see how she has thrust herself to the front of this committee. She is the public face of it right now. She is the most aggressive, the most out there. Folks that we've spoken to say that behind the scenes she is in every meeting, wants to be a part of everything, wants to help decide what to do, what the next moves are, and such. And it's become a very interesting wrinkle of the story and in the larger Cheney story of American history, where we have a new Cheney who is leading a very, very, very aggressive effort.